Hello! My name is Andrew, and I'm gonna try to make a Japanese kitchen knife using only the knowledge that I've acquired over years of watching knife-making videos on YouTube. I've never made a knife before, but after watching countless Alec Steele videos, it's something I really want to try. Plus, Christmas is coming up, and I have no ideas what to get my family members. So I might as well just lump my desire to make knives with my lack of forethought in Christmas gifts. But I wanted to challenge myself. So I'm going to try to make 3 knives for my family members, and they all have to be done by Christmas. Here in my garage, I'm starting out with a bar of Japanese blue paper steel. It's a high carbon steel, not stainless, so it will tarnish over time, and if left with moisture on it, it will rust. But it is supposed to be very durable, and it is supposed to hold a very nice edge. So that's what I want. I decided on the Hinesuke shape for my blades. Hinesuke is a Japanese boning knife. They're very robust and rigid and are mainly used to break down fish and poultry. Fun fact, in Japanese, Hinesuke translates to bone lover. After tracing out the profile of the blade with a Sharpie, I'm going to remove the larger sections to cut down on grinding time later. This would probably be faster with an angle grinder, but I already had the Dremel from when I had to remove some tamper-proof bolts from my car. Now that the larger chunks are removed, I'm going to use my brand new belt sander to more precisely refine the profile of my blade. This is a tool that I was pretty sure I was going to have to buy if I wanted to meet my Christmas deadline. It removed material incredibly quickly, and I felt like I was able to be way more precise than if I had been using hand tools. If you're thinking about getting into making knives, I think this is a worthwhile investment that could make the initial steps a lot easier. Now, you might be asking, Andrew, why are you wasting quality materials on your first attempts instead of just spending a few $100s on quality knives for your family? Well, first of all, shut up. Second of all, why would I spend a couple $100s on some decent, commercially available knives when instead I could spend $1,000 on tools and materials to make an objectively inferior final product? Anyway, moving on. With the profile roughed out, I flatten out the sides, and then I use a Sharpie and a set of calipers to mark out some guidelines for the bevels and the edge. And now it's time to grind the bevels. I don't really have any advice for this. Honestly, I just kind of went for it and hoped for the best. I found that using higher grits between, I'd say 80 and 100 was a little bit forgiving because it didn't remove material quite as quickly as the grits between 30 and 60. And I just took my time and I tried to make sure that I was grinding off material evenly on both sides. The belt sander is great, but it's almost too great. I want to do the majority of my hand sanding now because it's going to be a lot more difficult to remove material once the steel has been heat treated. Hand sanding is a demoralizing process. I would spend 10 minutes trying to get one scratch from the belt sander out of the blade, and as soon as I was finished with it, I would see 3 more that I would have to spend another half hour working on. After 3.5 hours of hand sanding, my knuckles were sore, my fingertips were starting to wear away on the sandpaper, so I decided to call it a night and get some rest and get back to it the next day. With some coffee in my system, I had the energy to get back to the task of hand sanding, and I was able to finish it up in about an hour and a half. And now it's time for the heat treat. But Andrew, what is heat treating? Heat treating is the process of bringing steel up to its critical temperature and then quenching it in oil or water to transform it into a hardened state. But Andrew, what's the critical temperature? Blue paper steel is an alloy of iron, carbon, silicon, manganese, chromium, and tungsten. But we're really only concerned about the carbon, which is present at about 1.1 to 1.2%. Around 730 degrees Celsius, the iron-carbon alloy undergoes a phase change from cementite to austenite. This is the critical temperature. When austenite is cooled rapidly, the crystal structure is locked into a form called martensite, which is harder and more durable than the cementite we started with. In other words, metal soft, make hot, fast cold, metal hard. This is my forge. I'm not going to show you how to make it because it's shitty. I might make another one soon. I don't know. This part of the process was actually a little bit of a treat. It was getting down to the single digits in my garage, and whenever I had the forge lit, it actually made it nice and warm. In fact, it made me so cozy that at one point I just fell asleep in my chair, and I didn't even wake up again until the propane tank ran out and it started to cool down again. I should probably invest in a bigger tank. With a nap under my belt, I did an annealing cycle, and this is intended to relieve any potential stresses in the steel so that it's less likely to warp or crack during the quench. According to the data sheet that came with my steel, I want to quench the blade around 800 degrees Celsius to achieve a final Rockwell hardness of 62. As far as I know, you can tell the temperature of the steel by looking at its color or testing it against a magnet. The temperature at which steel is no longer magnetic, or its Curie temperature, is about 720 degrees Celsius. So if you pull the blade out of the forge and a magnet doesn't stick, then you know you're in the ballpark. However, to reiterate, I don't know what I'm doing. So I just got the steel as hot as I could, and I dunked it in some oil. Alright, that seems to have worked. So the blade is hard, but at this point it's too brittle. So I'm running it through a tempering cycle at 200 degrees Celsius for 2 hours, and that'll allow the blade to be more durable and less likely to chip. After the tempering cycle, I discovered some bad news. The blade is slightly curved to the left, near the tip. So I use a trick that I actually learned from Alec Steele, and I used some scrap metal and C-clamps to bend the blade straight, and I run it through another tempering cycle. I have to say I was pretty worried that I was going to snap this thing in half when I was tightening the C-clamps down, so I just had to make sure to be really careful and put it in the oven super gently. Yeah, and why don't you burn yourself on the way out, you friggin' doofus. 2 hours later, I let it cool down, and it looks fine, so I guess we can move on. I use some 400 grit sandpaper to knock off the hard forge scale, and then I move on to 1000 grit to polish it up. Apparently I want to get all of my scratch lines running parallel with the line of the knife. I've just heard this all the time from people that I've watched. I'm not sure why, but apparently everyone does it, so I'm going to. And now it's time for a hand sanding montage. With the blade polished, I'm going to oil it up and protect it with some paper towel and masking tape while I work on the handle. To be honest with you, this step has me nervous. What if I can't grind a hole good enough to jam my stiff rod into? But I'm not a quitter. So, after cutting a blank of black walnut on the table saw, I mark out the perimeter of the tang with my calipers. Now I picked black walnut for one very specific reason. It sounded familiar. So, I just figured people probably use it. I don't really have the space or the money for a drill press, so I figured my best bet was clamping this drill guide to the power stool and just hoping for the best. I knew I wouldn't be able to get the hole perfectly straight, but I hoped that I had left myself enough wiggle room that I'd be able to fix it with hand files later. After slightly widening the pilot hole with a round needle file, I moved on to a modified jigsaw blade to more effectively draw material out from the slot. This is another tedious process. Going back and forth from the files to the jigsaw blade and constantly checking with the tang to make sure that I don't go too far. I can cover up some of my ineptitude in the glue up, but I just don't want the tang to be loose in the hole. Once I'm a couple centimeters away, I'm going to heat up the tang with a blowtorch and burn it the rest of the way in with a clamp. Now this next step is a doozy. I'm marking out where I think the tang is going to lie on either side of the handle, and then I'm marking a spot for a brass pin that's going to hold the blade and the handle together. I was kind of paranoid about getting this hole perfectly straight, so it got a little janky. I clamped the blade into the handle, I clamped the handle into my vise, and then I clamped my drill guide to my vise. It worked though, and I still have all my fingers. I have a straight hole through the tang, and the brass pin fits. Now I just have to mix up some 2-part epoxy, apply it liberally to the tang and to the slot, and then I clamp it up and insert the brass pin and let it cure overnight. Now that the epoxy is cured, I Dremel off the excess and I can get to work filing and hand sanding the handle to its final shape. And just like that, the handle's done. I give it a couple of coats of butcher's block oil and conditioner to protect the wood. After all this time, it's the crucial step of taking this glorified letter opener and turning it into an actual knife. I do have a lot of experience with sharpening knives on whetstones, but my best advice would be to watch any of these videos, and they're probably better qualified to teach you how to do it than I am. After soaking my stones, I am first establishing my edge on my 300 grit stone. This removes a lot of material and is generally only used when repairing damaged knives, such as when they have chips or broken tips. With my edge polished up, I begin polishing at 1000 grit, and then I work my way up to 3000, 6000, 12,000, and I finish by stropping on my leather belt. Now that the edge is sharp, I'm giving the blade a final polish with some 3000 grit sandpaper, doing the same to the handle, and after a final coat of butcher's block oil and conditioner, it's finally done. I then do the exact same thing 2 more times. And they're all done! I actually made all of the knives simultaneously, but I decided only to film one of the knives in particular. I did virtually the exact same process with all 3, so I don't think that should matter. We can see that all 3 knives very easily cut through a sheet of paper and then can shave some hair off of my arm. And, you know, as one would hope, my knives do in fact cut a cucumber. So at the very least, they will be able to do that. In conclusion, yeah, they're not perfect. They're a little bit chunky, a little bit heavy, a little bit thick, but overall, I'm really happy with how these knives turned out. I was able to complete them before Christmas, and I can say that everybody was very excited, very happy to receive them. Even though a lot of the steps were tedious, and it did take many, many hours to actually make all 3 of these knives, I will say the thing that kept on popping into my head was how straightforward each step was. Even though the whole project was a lot of work, each step seemed super manageable. So I guess that I say that to mean that if you have something that you've been meaning to try that you're interested in, then just give it a shot, and you might find that it's not as daunting as you thought it was, and you might make something cool. Anyway, bye!